you have experienced the paranormal as well as the phenomenon. So it's interesting that your life has been a mix of ghosts and UFOs, it seems, and those seem
Yeah.
to not usually be the same thing. But I'm finding as I do more research in this that they are connected because it's about consciousness and other dimensions. And if you wanted to start with your again 3 or 4 years old and move on from there, please feel free.
Yeah, sure. Um, so I mean, as a preface, we just moved to Lavant, which is a beautiful countryside village. It's got old Roman and medieval architecture in it. It's been practically untouched over the years, except for one area where they like started building on it in like the 80s, 70s, 80s. Um, so I mean, as an area, it's full of history. Our house that we were renting was actually built on the back of the land. It used to belong to the graveyard of one of the two parish churches there. But our priest at the time, he didn't know if anybody had actually been buried where our garden was, because the last burials have been in like the Saxon times or something like that. So, um, but so far as I'm aware, other than some people at the local pub talking about random Roman centurions that they sometimes saw walking through the walls, there was no other like reports in the area of like any kind of paranormal activity until me and Mum turned up. Basically, my birth father had just left about 6 months before my first experience when we were living there, and I can remember it quite clearly. Um, it's actually something that my mum finds quite remarkable is just the sort of vividity of like tiny little details I have from even things like when I'm 2 years old. But I can remember like the exact layout of everything in the house. I know exactly where mum was, the angle she was at the time. I know exactly how she was bent over the kitchen sink at the time. And I remember that I'd been looking at her, and I turned around past the front door, which was slightly ajar, because it was a summer day and she was letting some of the breeze in to help cool down the house a bit. I remember I looked past that door and I looked towards the stairs, and the sunlight was coming through the door just well enough that it was illuminating up the stairwell. And as I turned to look at it, I saw that there was this shadow, like an adult man height, about the same height as my mum. So I'd say about 5'7", was cast against the wall. But of course, there was nobody casting it. There was nobody standing outside on the front porch that could have cast it or anything like that. It was just a disembodied shadow. And as I was looking at this shadow, it began to just move silently up the stairs. And it was bobbing as a person would walking up. Once it reached the top, where it was finally a bit more shadowed at the top of the stairs, it just blended into those shadows and disappeared. And I immediately turned back to Mum and I was like, "Oh, Mum, I just saw this." And I think Mum just at the time she just took it as being a ghost, because at the time she still believed in those things. Um, her faith has changed a lot since then, but back then that was kind of her go-to explanation because we've been raised partially spiritualist. So, mediumship was a thing that she understood. But after that, it was like everything just sort of set off in the house. Um, Even our neighbor 2 doors down began reporting that she was having phenomena occurring in her house. Like the doorknobs would be rattling, the door would just be opening of its own accord. Just all manner of different poltergeist associated things were occurring in her home. And she would come around and talk to Mum about that. And then other neighbors who were experiencing nothing, and other people we invited around to the house, family, friends, people from church, would come around the house and see the same things as we did. So I mean, we had pretty much the full gamut. We had like the flickering lights, we had the cold spots, we had these weird bobbing coloured like plasma ball lights that even other people who came around saw when we weren't looking at them, and described them exactly as we saw them. They could be like reds, they could be green, they could be cream yellow coloured, they could be blue. Often in threes, and they were kind of have this kind of rotating dancing pattern, or they just be bobbing up and down. we had sort of generic sort of orbs, not the kind that you catch on camera where it looks almost like a sort of dust particle, but something that's more like, if you've ever owned one of those plasma balls when you were little and it's got all of the filaments in, you can touch with your hand. It's kind of like that, but instead of it being like filaments, it's more of a glow. But it's still got that kind of sheath around the outside that looks almost transparent. We were seeing a lot of those. They would just move around the room. Me and Mum remember it slightly differently as to whether or not they kind of disappeared before they came to solid objects, or whether or not they passed through them. But they'd make curving turns and all these sort of things. Mum even remembers them doing a little zigzag at one point. So I mean, these clearly weren't just insects or dust particles or whatever that was somehow catching the light in such a way all the time, especially like in the dead of night and whatever, to appear that way. We had various things like the shadows again of people, of a little dog in the upstairs bathroom. There was 2 separate Christmas Eves where this massive wind just blew through the house. Like no windows or doors were open, but this massive wind just blew through the house. Everything was shaking. The pictures fell off the wall in the hallway. And even our neighbours a few doors down had felt it, but further down the street, they hadn't felt it at all. So it was incredibly localized to our area. I mean, all of this stuff was going on for quite some time. I think it was about 2 years that this stuff was initially going on for, until I actually ended up seeing any UFOs at all. And the very first UFOs that I saw were ones, because what used to happen was Mum would go and tuck me in at night, and I would not stay in bed. The moment she was out of the room, I'd just immediately get up, go straight to my bedroom window and look outside, because I love looking up at the stars and the moon and everything at night. And I became familiar with like all of the aeroplanes and all the things that passed over, because we were near to the Goodwoods, flight area and everything. And but this on this particular night was something I wasn't used to seeing at all. It appeared as kind of like this triangular orange blob at first in the distance, coming over the hills of the countryside, until it came close to the houses just opposite from my bedroom window. The roofs of them, as it was passing behind them, I could see that it was more of a pyramid shape. And it had these kind of striations or tiers on the side, and this kind of, not circular, obviously, because it's a pyramid, but like a sort of, nevertheless, a kind of dome shape on the top that was a more fluorescent, bright color, while there's everything else was more like dull neon orange. And that was passing behind the roofs of the houses incredibly slowly. And I thought it was a hot air balloon at the time, because I'd seen hot air balloons, but of course it didn't have a basket underneath it. It wasn't having any of the kind of whooshing. There was no flickering light, none of that sort of thing. And the way that it was moving was really strange, because most hot air balloons, of course, they shake a little bit, or aeroplanes, they've got kind of like they glide. This thing, the way it was moving, the closest I can compare it to is the way that like an air hockey puck, those fast moving pucks on the table, it was like that, but incredibly slowly. It was sliding through the sky, and it was going over all of the houses really slowly, until it got to this set of trees that leads onto an old Roman road called Centurion Way. And when it passed behind those trees, it disappeared. And I continued looking out my bedroom window, because I wanted to see if it was going to come back. And then another one, which was this time blue in color, came up from behind at the end of the street, one of the roofs of the houses there. And as it was rising up into view, these 3 lights in a triangle formation very briefly flashed into view off the edges of it. They weren't actually attached to it that I could see. And then that just glided slowly behind the same trees that the orange one had gone. So yeah, that was my first UFO type encounter. And shortly after that, I got visited by the Men in Black at my school. So at the primary school that I was at, it was a Catholic convent school. So there was a nunnery next to it. One day while I was there, again, remember I'm like about 5.5 years old at this point. So one day while I was at school, apparently this black van with like blacked out windows had parked up on opposite the school on the other side of the street, and this man had got out of the front of it and had been pacing back and forth outside of the front of the school gates for a while until Sister Joseph Clare, I think it was, had gone out and had a chat with him and basically like tried to establish why you here, like and he'd just gone back to his vehicle. My auntie actually remembers this because I think she was outside at that time. She was either on the grass playing field because it was her break, or she was going to another class or something, but she remembers actually seeing the man there going back and forwards. And later when she was describing it to Mum, she described it exactly the same as I did. But later in that day, my class had to go through that same school gate and cross the road to get to a set of buildings we were taking classes in on the other side. And as we were going across the road crossing, the front doors of this van opened and two men stepped out. And the closest that I could compare it to when I was talking to Ian was they looked like a pair of like mobsters. Like the quintessential kind of like fedora hat, just mobster kind of outfit, suit, the tie and all that sort of thing. But bizarre in the fact that they had absolutely no facial hair whatsoever. And when I mean no facial hair, I mean no eyebrows, even nothing.
Wow.
Just completely pale. And these two men got out in front of the car. They didn't look identical, I would hasten to add, but, apart from their attire. But the one who had got out of what would be the left side of the car, the left door, he was absolutely staring at me intently, like with this kind of almost angry, like piercing expression in his eyes, and directly at me. Like as I was going across the road, his head was like tracking, following me. And then as I was halfway across the road, he just strides, like makes a beeline, like his legs are moving like in a stride, makes a huge beeline straight for me. And Sister Joseph Clare stood in his way. And I can remember this. And she was basically saying, get back to your vehicle. What do you think you're doing? I'm going to call the police if you don't, go back right now. And they immediately just turned around without saying a word, got back into his vehicle and just sped off. And thankfully, I've not seen them again since then. But after that, the school became incredibly security conscious. Like they wouldn't allow parents to just let their kids wander out to their cars anymore. They had to come in and get them. But I remember that the nuns did something in the newsletter at the time, and I'm sure there's probably copies of that newsletter somewhere. But yeah, and of course my auntie also corroborated it, and said about the fact that she'd seen the men. And my mum was terrified because she thought it was at the time. There was these phantom care workers and such that were going around, as people were calling them, who were presenting false credentials and trying to abduct children. That's what Mum thought they were. So she was terrified that I was going to get taken by these people. And frankly, I don't know what would have happened to me if I had been taken. It was also established as well, going back to that initial shadow that I'd seen going up the stairs, the very first thing, was that at the same time as that had been happening, and I'd watched this shadow going up the stairs, Mum had actually been off work that day because she was sick. I think she'd come down with the flu or something. She hadn't been able to go into work. But her work phoned her up halfway through the day. I think it was just after I saw this shadow, and said to her, "Oh, you came in today. You've taken some of our documents. Where did you go?" And Mum's like, "That's impossible. I've been at home all day, And she was like, "What was I dressed in? When did I come in?" And they described her as wearing this kind of like black suit, this black outfit that she didn't even own. And according to them, the spitting image of Mum, like indistinguishable from Mum in every single detail except for this outfit, had walked in, had ignored literally everybody at the desks, like 15 people or something had seen it, and it ignored all of them, went straight for the postal room, took the morning's postal documents, went to the stairwell up to where Mum worked on the second floor, went up, turned the corner so that everybody on the lower floor couldn't see it anymore, but the people on the top floor who should have been able to see it never saw it arrive. It's like when it turned the corner on that stairwell, it just disappeared. But apparently, Mum managed to corroborate the times. At the same time as this thing had been going up the stairs there, I saw a shadow going up the stairs at home. So for Mum, that was like this extra kind of detail that was like, oh, that's weird, because it's like maybe they were wrong, but then seeing that at the same time, it's like, especially because they're insisting, no, it must have been you. How could they be?
And that's the first doppelganger incident.
It was.
Yeah.
One of very many that would come.
It seems so scary that, or just just unfathomable. That could possibly happen. And what's interesting is whatever it was, it knew where your mom worked. It knew to go to why would it grab stuff in the postal office?
Not a clue.
Well, do you have any
I don't know what could have even been relevant. I mean, at this time, like I say, we barely had anything going on. That shadow was the first thing I'd seen in the house. Like, Mum had a lifetime of seeing ghosts and such before then, but nothing that would have prompted it taking random mail or documents and the boots.
Happening
where Mum works,
and that happened at the exact time you were seeing the shadow on the stairs.
Exact same time. Same time.
So strange. Do
you have any speculation as to what maybe it was? Do you think it was correlated with the shadow, or do you think
me and Mum still don't know? We still haven't got a clue. I think if a shadow and it were connected, the only thing that I could suggest is it was some kind of almost like remote viewed manifestations. But it's very hard to say exactly what it could be.
Yeah, that's the only thing. It's how could they possibly be connected yet? It happened at the exact same time. So yeah. And they say nothing is a coincidence, but it's just crazy. Anyway, sorry, go ahead.
No, it's fine. One thing that Mum noted, actually, which I never even thought of when I was talking to my case investigator, is, of course, those two people who turned up at the school were, of course, dressed in black attire, and so had that woman been who turned up at her work. So Mum sort of made a connection there, and, maybe there's something to that, I don't know. So going back after, of course, these men in black had turned up at the school, things continued to get strange after that point. The same paranormal activity was happening in the house. There was one very, very weird incident where I woke up one night and decided I just wanted to go for a walk for some reason. And I don't even sleepwalk. I'm not prone to sleepwalking at all. But I got up out of my bed barefoot, in my pajamas, a young boy of almost 6 years old, and decided that I was going to go downstairs, out the front door, walk all the way down Centurion Way, to go stand in front of some random sculptures that have been made of diggers and Romans. Look at that in the moonlight, and then it was I snapped out of this almost trance that I've been walking in, and I realized where I was and how far I'd come from home, and I became terrified, and I started calling out for Mum, and I remember really, really clearly remember it. I remember exactly how everything felt. I remember the positions of everything, exactly what it was like going back up Centurion Way, and how I got almost to the crossroads. It was when I got almost to the crossroads, that's when I stopped calling out for Mum, because there's this little area that kind of forks off into two ways. But that was when I realized she couldn't hear me. Obviously, she's at home, she's asleep. She probably doesn't even know I've left home. And it was just as I realized this, and I was scared, and I was trying to make my way back home. I felt like I was being watched. I felt like eyes on my back. And I turned around the first time and couldn't see anything. But after going a little bit further down the track and then turning back again, there was these two, what was to me at my height, incredibly tall and slim, beings standing down behind the track, one on each side of the path. And they must have been at least, I mean, it's hard to estimate because I was a little kid, but it was way taller than Mum. So it must have had to have been at least 6 foot. And just made of this kind of dusky, plasma-like white light. Very weird, elongated features. And they were completely silent, but I felt a total sense of peace and calm come over me when I saw them. And they accompanied me back home, all the way back down Centurion Way, just walking behind me. And when I got to the end of Centurion Way, so coming back into the close where I lived, there's this old railway tunnel there, which I was always terrified of. The fact that I even went straight under it without thinking of anything in the first place, I was in a total trance. I was absolutely terrified of this bridge, and I could never tell you why. It was always there was just something there under it that couldn't be seen, that you could feel it. But I came up to this bridge, and the two of them stood at either side of it, and one of them raised their hand like this in a sort of farewell to me, and then they both just faded out. And it was at that point I continued on under the bridge and went home. I wasn't afraid at all. and like I could hear the dawn chorus of all of the birds. I could see the sun was rising. It was casting that beautiful kind of pinkish golden light on everything. Went back home, went upstairs to my room, got back into bed, went back to sleep until Mum got me up later in the morning. And I said to her, "Oh, Mum, guess what I did last night? But you weren't there," and I got scared. Mum, I think, put it down to being a nightmare at the time, and the reason why was because my feet were dirty, but not quite as dirty as you'd have expected from me having walked that whole way, and there was no footprints leading from the front door up to my room. Also, as well, the front door was locked, whereas when I'd gone downstairs earlier that night, it had been opened, and I was able to go out and come back in again. And the way that the door worked, it might have locked itself when I pulled it shut when I came back in. That is possible, but I can't say for certain. So Mum had put it down to a dream, but still found it very perplexing. And it was interesting because it was shortly after that I began being woken up at night to see that there was a very strange sort of moonlight coming through my bedroom window. And I compare it to moonlight because it had that same kind of like dusky look to it, that almost faded quality, but a little bit thicker, same sort of color as well. But it was this like cluster, almost in a kind of rectangle, of all of these rays, these straight edged rays, this cluster of them coming through my window. And it would always be the case, this lasted for about a year, it would always be the case that when I got up, the moment I headed towards my window, there was like this sort of tink click sound. Like the best I can compare it to is like when a light bulb goes, you know, that sound when a light bulb goes blink, like that. Also combined with like the sound of a flicking switch on a wall. There was that sound, and then immediately it was just gone, as if it had just switched off. And I would go and stand in front of my window, and I wouldn't be able to see the moon. It like wouldn't even be there to be seen, or it would be hidden behind the houses. There's just no way it could have cast that light. About
at that point, you don't think that? I'm sorry. At that point, you don't think that might have been an abduction moment when?
I don't know.
Yeah, you have no idea. Yeah,
I have no idea. Because I don't remember anything else apart from that. I just remember waking up, seeing those beams, them switching off as soon as I saw them or I tried to approach them. And by the time I got to my window, of course, there's nothing to be seen.
Right. You said it was about a year of this.
That was a year. It was a year ongoing.
Almost every night, or like just the frequency.
Every few nights.
Wow.
Nights. Yeah. So I would say 3 or 4 day gaps maybe in between seeing it each time. Mum recalls it as being almost repetitive, almost like this Tuesday, Thursday kind of thing. I can't remember that. I just remember that it was like a space of days in between each time that I saw them at my window. But Mum does remember me talking about them. You know, but yeah, so that was about a year that went on for.
And just before this, you had the coat incident. Wasn't it just before
the
that?
Coat ghost. Yeah, it was just before that. I mean, I called it a coat, but it's not a coat. It's my dressing gown.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, that was utterly bizarre. That occurred over the course of 3 nights. And I remember the first night that I woke up and saw this phenomena occur. I don't know why, but it's like I felt that like my head had to look towards my bedroom door. And as I was looking at it, the sleeves on the bottom of my dressing gown were kind of swaying a little bit as if they were being buffeted by a sort of breeze. And then all of a sudden, my dressing gown just unhooked itself off my door and then turned and came towards my bed, just with nothing in it, with these arms just swaying back and forwards ridiculously like someone was walking in it. And it came right to the side of my bed and leant right over me, like right into my face. And I just immediately pulled my covers up over myself and forced myself back to sleep, which is a difficult thing to do when you're terrified, but nevertheless, somehow I managed it. And this occurred twice. It was 2 of the exact same occasions. But on the 3rd time that I woke up, it was already standing by my bed. It hadn't bent over me yet. It was standing by my bed. And as I looked up at it in fear, it turned away and immediately went, with its arms doing the swing thing, immediately went towards my bedroom door. My bedroom door's handle, which was a little knob thing, twisted itself and the door opened itself. And then it proceeded out down the hallway. And for some unfathomable reason, I cannot tell you, as a little child, who's just seen his his night terror monster leave his room, decided not to shut my door and go to sleep. I decided to follow it. And the only thing I can think of is that I was afraid of for Mum, because it was going down the hallway towards her room. So I followed this thing out, and I saw that Mum's bedroom door was ajar. And I opened it, and I went inside, and there was Mum asleep on the right side of the bed. And on the left side, sort of left middle, was what I call the coat ghost. My dressing gown just sat there on the edge of the bed, and it takes one of its arms and just pats it. Like for me to go sit down next to it. And for some reason, again, I can't understand why I did this. I went and I sat down beside it, and its head part turns to me and leans down a little bit. And its voice is incredibly hard to replicate. It had like, the only thing I can compare it to is like someone who has been smoking a lot. Almost that kind of husky voice to it. Yeah. It was definitely not anybody I knew. But it was weird because the way that it talked to me was almost caring about Mum. And it told me that basically Mum loved me very much and I had to look after her. Would I do that? And I was like, yeah, of course I'll do that. And then the moment I agreed to do what it wanted me to do, it just crumpled. Like the entire dressing gown, almost like, an old slinky crumples. Yeah. It falls in on itself. It was like that. My dressing gown just sort of crumpled. And I just took it in my arms, carried it all the way back to my bedroom, threw it on the floor next to my bed because I thought it had to be on the back of my door for it to animate. So I just threw it on my floor. I thought it was safer that way. Got into bed, went back to sleep, told Mum about it the following morning, and she was just bemused because she's always suffered with like various health conditions, but she had no idea what specifically it was talking about at the time when it told me to look after her. But after that, I never saw it again. And I have absolutely no idea what went on with that. But I tell you, even now, I can't have certain things hung up on the back of my door. I get like, when I come into my bedroom, even now, it's like if anything is hung up on the back of my door that I don't want to be, it's like this little jump of fear inside of me, and I just have to stare at it until I catch myself, and I'm like, no, they're stupid. It's just a dressing gown. It's just a coat. Look away. It's fine.
I don't blame you at all.
Yeah,
to have that happen is amazing, but it's amazing that once you appeased it or said yes, I'll do that, and thankfully it was asking a very nice thing. Watch after your mother.
Bizarrely, despite having terrified me before. Yeah.
Once you said I'll do that, of course, and it crumples. You would wonder. And your mom did not have any relatives or anything that had a rough voice.
No.
Yeah, that's amazing. Well, someone's looking after her.
Compare it to. Yeah. Don't know who, but yeah.
But after that.
Yeah. So thank you for reminding me of that, because that procedure.
Yeah, sure.
It was only 2 experiences, but it really seemed to that's quite that's really quite traumatic thing to really witness, and it's still almost like as a residual, which is pretty scary. It's quite terrifying, really.
Yeah, it was. Yeah.
And shortly after that is when you did start having the abductions, the nighttime abductions that you say last for about 2 years, from 99 to 2000.
That's right. Yeah.
And you'd see the beams in the windows, and but again, for the most part, at the first, the beams would just blink out and you'd hear that sound. But then you started remembering. Go ahead and tell us about remembering being taken.
Oh, yeah. So it was about a year afterwards. The difference was that the beams weren't at my window initially. That was the difference with it. But it used to be that either it was when Mum had just tucked me into bed and she'd left, and I'd get up and go have a look out my window, or it would be when I was woken up at night. Almost, it was like just always as though I was waking up at just the right time to see this. I would go over to my bedroom window, and there was this square-shaped thing, this square-shaped plane that was coming over from the direction of Chichester and passing over the close. And the interesting thing is that when it was an overcast night and there was cloud cover, you could see it passing just above where the clouds were. It was like you could see its haze of this light passing, through these clouds. But when it was a clear night, this object that looked like a square shape It was either a kind of like neon orange color or a white color, or a sort of almost like, you know, burning magnesium white luminescence. And I had these 4 green lights on the underside, like you know, like a 4 on a dice. It had that on the underside, one in each corner. But the green lights were strange. They were like nothing I've ever seen since then, because the way that they move is like if you activate the gas fire on a stovetop, you know how the fire comes up and it kind of flickers a bit?
Yeah.
That's exactly how it looked. It was almost like these green flickering light rings. But that would come and just stop over the close. And sometimes it would just stop and nothing would happen, and I'd just look up at it. And then it got to the point where it began to shine down those exact same beams that I've been seeing. It was either from the front of it here or from the middle of it just underneath the green light here. And it would shine it down through my bedroom window. I never saw it shining onto the ground or anything like that. It was always straight down into my bedroom window and straight onto me. And the interesting thing about the light, when I was actually there to look at it, was that it doesn't blind you when you look into it. If you look directly at the sun, you get those weird kind of after effects in your eyes. It never gave me that. I could get dry eyes from like staring at it for ages and having my eyes open, but it wasn't the light that was making my eyes dry. And if I closed my eyes, I remember it was like a thin thing. When I closed my eyes, I could see this kind of like silvery color. But it only ever illuminated the room like moonlight would. It never was like this blinding kind of like, and let there be light. But sometimes that's all it would do. It would just have these beams shining on me. I remember I just felt the greatest sense of like peace and just calm and friendship, and everything just wash over me whenever this light was on me. And as long as it kept it on me, I was really grateful. I looked forward to seeing it come over the close, just in case it would do that.
Would you say it was like a similar feeling to your experience when you were a lot younger? That same like tranquil, like at peace, very similar.
Exactly the same sort of feeling. Yes.
Yeah. Did it seem more? Was it more intense this, you know, when you're older, or?
No, not necessarily.
Okay, roughly the same.
Yeah, roughly the same.
Also,
but yeah.
The fascinating thing, real quick, about the lights you described throughout the whole your experience through your life is so similar to other abductees or what contactees see, is the light doesn't illuminate the room, but the light is just a light, or it's like on the ship, it's a light that was going over, but it wasn't illuminating anything. It was just illuminating itself. And I always
laser, almost like a concentrated.
Yeah, it doesn't. If you shine a torch into the darkness, of course, it's lighting up to some degree, but the direction you're shining it at. This didn't, just like you said. It was a very self-contained light. It was almost only illuminating itself. Or what you know, if it hit me, I don't even know if it hit me, because of course, like illuminating me when it hit me, because I can't. It wasn't really what I was looking at. I was just looking up at the light of this craft.
Yeah.
I don't actually remember. Go ahead though. What were you going to say?
Well, I was going to ask if Ian had ever said anything about other abductions about the light. Well, now I think I've lost my train of thought because I'm still just speaking of you. No, that's okay, because the experiences are so fantastic and amazing. But if I remember it, I'll bring it back up. But go ahead about the light.
And actually, just before you just do that point, like my pretty much my first big experience in 2006 was exactly similar, where there was this blue light on this, what we appeared to be like some type of, I don't know, some type of entity or something that appeared like somebody on a bike, like hunched over like this, and the light didn't spread. It was just like straight concentrated blue light. And both my friend Aaron and I, complete time lost how long this was, but. And when it swooped, like it turned around, it was like stalking us in front of a street. It didn't, it just like almost mechanically went. But I don't remember any like tranquil feelings, but it's just, I don't, some type of technology or something. But yeah, please continue. Yeah.
No, the only thing I was going to say was that I actually don't remember when I first started going on board what I thought was an airplane. I thought it was just some strange shaped airplane. They probably come from like the local airport of Tangmere or something. But I can't remember when it was that I was like, in terms of a date. when I was first brought on board. I just remember that I was, and I remember that it was either the first or second time I was taken up onto the aircraft itself. That there was these two women on board. They're the only like adult figures I can remember seeing, and there was one of them in particular who was this this fair blonde haired woman, just incredibly like kind and benevolent and empathetic, and a very almost kind of like ethereal kind of look to her. She told me that I was actually on a spaceship, which of course I was super excited at. But then again, my only knowledge of spaceships at that time was like Thunderbirds or Captain Scarlet or something like that. But I was like super excited because it was like, oh wow, I just thought this was an airplane. But all I can remember of actually being on board the craft is these three areas. There was two rooms that were exactly the same, bar a couple of features, and they were circular. They had a slightly, an almost flat, but almost slightly domed roof, a flat floor. There was kind of like these two seating bits that were almost like made of the same material as the wall and floor, molded out of it, like going around on one side of the room. And then on the other side of the room, there was like these two entrances that would go into two corridors, and there was a screen in between them, this big sort of like white colored screen that was up on the wall. And I remember that on that screen, they showed like flashing colored video footage, like scenes, and they had their symbols that would appear like in the bottom of the screen, like different presumably words or numbers, I don't know, would appear on that. I can't remember what we were taught from that screen. I just remember the memory of seeing stuff on that screen. But it wasn't until quite a few abductions in terms of my memory, that it was almost like I recognized I wasn't the only kid on board. There was these other four children as well. There was this pair of twins who I remember they had like curly, shocking red hair, kind of ginger red hair. They had freckles on this part of their face, brown freckles. They were very like, they're very kept to themselves, very shy. They didn't interact with any of us at all. They always just sat together on one corner of the room, or just interacted with a blonde woman, but never with us. There was these two other children as well. There was a blonde-haired one and a darker-haired one, and the darker-haired one was definitely a bit older than me, but generally we're all about the same age, roughly. If I had to place the age of the older kid, I'd say maybe like 9 or 10. And I remember his name was Derek. Like, Derek Trotter in Only Fools and Horses. His name was Derek. And he was the one that was, that he interacted with the one besides me that the two women on board were the most interested in. And I'll get to why in a moment, because of course that'll lead into telepathy as well.
I think you're muted, Leaf. I think you just cut out like just for.
Yeah, I was going to say you were just describing Derek and you cut out. So you said he was the one that was the most, and I'm guessing you said most interactive with them. What did you say there?
No, Derek was the one who interacted with me the most. He was the most friendly towards me, and he was also the one who, besides me, the two women were the most interested in. As I say, I'll get as to why in a moment, because it will lead into the whole telepathy thing. But I remember that beyond these two doors on either side of the screen, they would go into these kind of like curved corridors that had this long amber light fitting running down the side of the wall on each side. Everything in there, I remember, was just incredibly smooth and curved. It wasn't slippery, but it had this very smooth. The thing I would compare it to is like old Apple products. Like the Apple computer, or Apple iPhones and things, where it had that kind of like white, semi-transparent white casing, and it was very kind of smooth.
Were you ever told
like that?
Were you ever told not to touch the walls? Because in other cases, I want to say Jim Sparks, but I'm not sure. But there were other cases where they said that they would be walking down the halls, and whatever being was with them would say, "Don't touch the walls," because I'm guessing they're highly charged. But if that never happened, that's fine.
I'd have to confirm.
I don't know if it never happened. I just don't remember it. Okay. I know that the blonde woman. Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Whenever we would go down the corridors, the blonde woman would always be the one leading us. She'd be in front, and we'd walk behind. Whenever the darker haired woman, the other woman who I'll describe in a moment, she always stayed behind in the main room of the screen. But the blonde woman would always lead us away down one of these corridors to the other room. And I just remember that. I mean, I suppose I touched the walls because the whole thing seemed to be one piece. It was seamless. It was just the ceiling, the walls, the floors were all just one thing, and smooth and curved. So I presume that by touching the floor, I had touched the walls. But yeah, so I would always follow her down to this other room that was indistinguishable from the one that I had come from, except that there was no screen. And when we got into that room, she would always, so there was always like, I remember there was like this thing was almost like a table that again had kind of like been molded out of the wall. There was like this sort of table on one side of a room, but there would always be these little things like lined up at a slight angle, like next to each other. And she would go over and take one of them. And it was almost like they're weird approximations of what like a train would look like, where they have a vague idea of what a train looks like, but not exactly. So it's like you get something that was like a combination of car and train, or a combination of something that was meant to be like an aeroplane but had like helicopter features or something. And they would bring that over, or rather she would bring that over, I would say, and she would hold it out in her palms to me. And I wasn't allowed to just immediately take it and start playing with it. The whole point was not for me to do trial and error testing using my hands like children do. It wasn't to play test like that. I had to use my mind to receive mental impressions, sensory feelings or images that showed me what I should do, how I should manipulate that toy to use it, how to play with it. And that was the test in each instance. But the way that you played with those toys was bizarre. It wasn't like a normal toy where you just wheel it around or whatever, and maybe you can press a button or something and makes a sound. It was like you'd be opening like these ridiculously finicky tiny little compartments, and just the weirdest like ways it would morph and change. It was just the most bizarre thing. You'd never have worked it out unless you knew what you were doing mentally. I mean, you just never would have got it. But if we did well, she'd give us the toy and she'd take us back to the other room and we could play with it. And if we didn't do well, she'd keep the toy and she'd put it back on the table. Sometimes she would also bring us these boxes as well, just these cubes. And we had to do pretty much exactly the same test, except this time, instead of just using our minds, we had to hold out the palm of our hand towards it. And right here in the palm of our hand, we had to pick up information from the cube. Like we had to pick up details like its age or its gender or its thoughts or something like that, because either something was inside of these cubes in each instance, or the cubes themselves were alive. They had an almost semi-transparent look to them, so you should have been able to see if there was something inside, but I can't remember ever seeing anything. But the thing that this blonde woman was incredibly interested in was the fact that as a little child, and it kind of it's kind of degraded as I've got older. It's still there every now and again, but it's way less common than it was when I was a child. When I was a little child, I had this kind of uncanny way with animals, pets, wild animals. When we just went out places, like animals that would be skittish or fearful of other people would never be so with me. Even when they were aggressive towards others, they'd never be so towards me. And it's funny because when I was around them, or even when I was around plants, like in somebody's garden, I could feel exactly what it was that they were feeling. I could feel almost like their thoughts and their feelings, their emotions. And I would often surprise people by saying things to them about like their pet cat or whatever. I remember there was this one kid at school called Ollie. I did this to with his hamster. They absolutely floored him because I got the fact that his hamster was sick correct. And I think I even got what he was sick with correct or something like that, or where it was in the body. I can't remember. But I remember that I said to him about how sick his hamster was, because I could feel from the hamster. It's like this impression that I had, as completely insane and stupid as that sounds. It was like I could feel from the hamster this impression that it was sick. And it was unhappy. It was bored. It was sick. It didn't like its environment. Ollie, of course, was convinced that this hamster was the happiest thing in the world. And it was, it could do no wrong. But But I was always like that. It was weird. It was even stones. It was like I could feel when a stone didn't like where it was positioned. It wanted to be put somewhere else. It wanted to be moved. Or I could feel like when I was in... Go ahead.
No, go ahead. I say that's crazy also because I don't know if you've ever heard of the raw material or the law of one stuff, but there's
very vaguely.
Yeah, there's a part where this being is describing consciousness of the universe and describing it at first density, second density, third density. We are all in a third density realm. Second density is supposed to be, I believe, I hope I don't get this wrong, is rocks and so forth. And it says that, of course, rocks aren't conscious, but it's like a sleeping consciousness. It's like a consciousness that's asleep. And when you say that, it's just kind of, whoa, it's a strange connection. But anyways, please go on with how you felt the rock felt was in the wrong place.
It's really, to describe it is an interesting question, because it was like, it's almost like it starts, it's a very light pressure right here in your forehead, but then moves up, goes out like this, and as it's going out like this in a band around your head, it's getting thicker and thicker and heavier, and it's like a slamming sensation right in the middle, but you begin to feel these like overwhelming feelings, and it's directed. You can feel exactly the direction it's coming from. If you turn your head, you would have to turn it back. You'd know exactly where it was to focus, exactly where it was. If you had your eyes blindfolded, you'd be able to turn your head and know exactly where the object was. That was, I guess, beaming this into your head, its own feelings.
Would you say it was almost like a magnetic force of sorts? If you're like near a very high powered magnet, maybe like a type of pressure like that.
Maybe.
I know watching when I used to watch John Edward. He was a psychic or a medium actually, and he'd start saying, "Okay, I'm getting something from," and he'd go, "I'm getting pulled right here." And when you say that, it reminds me of how he would just go, but he said he would actually also feel it here, I believe, but sometimes he'd go like this. If I remember right, but
almost like a kind of magnetic force where it's like if you're not really, if it's not synced correctly, it's not going to click in. You kind of have to just get that right, and it'll just there it is.
Yeah. But go on again. Sorry. It's so fast.
The interesting thing is that after the pressure clears, after the thickness clears, it's kind of like this cool gel, or like a cool liquid that kind of expands out like this across your forehead, and at that point, it is just complete focus. It's like you just know, you feel with precision exactly what it wants, or exactly what it's feeling. And it's not like you're hearing sounds. It's not like you're having words coming into your head almost. It's a knowing. It is this sensory feeling impression that gives you the exact information of what is going on. And this would happen even when I was in the shower. Mum can remember when I was like in the shower in a bath as a kid, and I'd be able to tell her how the water is feeling, or how like the particles or atoms or whatever in the water are feeling.
Wow.
And this interested the blonde woman to no end. Like the amount of time she asked me about it, like checking up on it and going. So tell me again about that kind of thing. Tell me more. I'll ask some questions about it.
Do you feel like when she was asking you those questions that she already knew this stuff? She could probably do it herself, but she just wants to make
100%.
sure you're okay. So she's just making sure you're learning it and getting
100%
a response from you. And okay.
And I think she was also interested because I think if I had to say the impression that I got from her, they were looking for children like that. Okay. And I know I wasn't the only one. Yep. Derek could do it as well. I think the other blonde-haired child could do it to some degree. He was the third most kind of like proficient on the ship each time. Derek was far more psionically capable than I was. He was like astronomically miles and leaps above me. And he held their most interest, but the blonde woman in particular was interested in that aspect of me, and so that was why she was trying to teach me to feel things from these objects.
Do you feel like, if you said that you can't do it as much anymore, but do you feel like if you practiced it, it would be able to come back? Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
I feel it's almost been made latent by my health conditions over the years.
Gotcha.
And other factors, but yeah, I think with enough practice, yes.
Okay.
It would come back. Yeah.
And just to backtrack,
I would say that with fair confidence. Yeah.
Yeah, and just to backtrack a little bit, because to me, this really almost seems like it's almost like a research study here, and it seemed that there's 4 children that are very advanced in terms of very advanced in terms of telepathy, and she's this teacher or this researcher is like getting excited, like, oh wow, you impressed me there. And you go back, they do this in adolescence research where it's you're given a reward, like, you know, so if you're able to complete the assignment, you get to play with a toy. That's how we work in psychology. That's exactly how we work in psychology. And I just wanted to clarify, was it the same design with the cube? You know, if you were accurate in the test of the cube, engaging what impression of the cube, were you able to play with the cube, or is there a type of reward?
We could take it with us.
Yes,
we could take it back to a main room. Same as the toys. Yeah, it was all the same sort of thing. The only difference was that in one of them, as I say, you just had to use your mind. In the other, you have to hold out your hand.
Right, okay.
And you have to feel it right here.
And you said you had to you could take it back to the main room. So there's a room where you're practicing, and then there's a room where you're kind of relaxing and playing.
And you're playing. Yeah.
That's like textbook child adolescent research.
It is. It's amazing. And I do want to say
I didn't know that, so that's fascinating. Yeah.
And we're learning that these beings are using the same psychology as they do down here.
Same design, the same type of design, essentially. But there is research in parapsych, but we're not we don't test it like that. For parapsychology, for like psi phenomenon, they primarily test right now with like RNG. So being able to predict like yes or no, that's the simplest way. There's it gets more complex than that, like with retrocognition and stuff. But generally in parapsychology, it's 1 or 0.
You know, I'd also like to point out that in I believe it was the Jim Sparks abduction, where he was abducted over 10 to 15 years, I think. But he was finding that they were doing similar things to him, practicing doing things against his will. He hated them. He absolutely hated the Greys and was having issues with them. But
I can't stand the Greys either.
Okay.
Completely different to these beings. Yeah.
Okay. The tall Greys or the little guys?
All of them. Can't stand any of them.
Okay, interesting.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, he was saying that what drove him crazy was, number one, getting abducted without his consent. Number two, they of course never told him what their mission was with him. But what was similar about what you're saying is he was always getting trained how to read their symbols, how to sometimes I think he had said he'd even been trained on how to move their ships, but the training was to calm the masses. He said that they would have he remembers a woman being trained, and they were having her herd people because it's kind of like looking towards the future or something, like the disclosure or something.
Well,
but he described them being trained to help calm the masses, and it kind of reminds me, like when you're saying, they're training you on how to think of things, and it might be just baby steps into how to help calm the masses when the time comes. Sorry.
It's like an advanced form of communication when you think about it. If you're able to sense, like, let's just go extreme and say you could, that same type of feeling that you had for that hamster, you could do for a person. You have medical diagnosis, right? Yeah. And I'm assuming, I guess, let me say this. I'll speculate, let's say the body has its own intelligence, right? So you can identify an issue in the body that the person's not really aware of. You can identify psychopathology that the person's not really, you could even, you can really go on to any type of script, but like that information is just there and it, and it, whatever way it, processes in might be a little different per the individual, but that's kind of where it seems to be going. And I'd argue that some of these species have that capability. maybe that teacher did. And she's, getting excited because she's like, whoa, like, oh, you impressed me on that one, like A+, like, just to personify it, but.
And your training, I mean, I'll call it training, I guess. Continue on with it. I mean, where did it end, and how far did you get, and did they seem to be happy or sad towards the end, or continue with the story?
I mean, we would always get words of encouragement whenever we got something right. She would always smile at us. She would always encourage us. But the end of it all was that ultimately, once we got past the point that we were using our hands to feel from these cubes, was that we then had to either hold her hands or hold out our hand towards her and communicate with her telepathically. I am useless at this when it comes to human beings. I've never been able to do it with people to save my life, and if I hit on anything, it's pure luck. When it comes to them, because they open that channel for you, it's so much easier. But it was almost like what she was trying to get me to do was that she wanted me, and the other children by extent, to get used to talking purely using our minds, not using our voices anymore, anything like that, to just talk purely using our minds. And we had to become comfortable with that. So what was interesting about talking to her? Yeah, go ahead.
Well, no, I was gonna say, once you got comfortable with that, when you're using your minds, it brings me to when you were also talking about, well, if you're using your minds, is this also a time when you could look at Derek or the other girls and know what they're thinking, know what's going on between everyone in the whole room? Okay.
That was what I was supposed to be able to do. I'm sure that Derek could do it. I could not. I wasn't able to do that.
And another thing, real quick, is you've never met any of the kids that were on the ship, right? Because I do know that there was one case, a documentary, I think it's on Prime, but she, the girl that, or the woman who was abducted as a child and had the similar experiences as you with the toys and everything, she had another child that she was playing with all the time. It was a boy, and she actually found him. It took her years.
Wow.
And she moved to different places. I think she originally lived in the UK, and then she moved to France, and then she, or I should say England, and then she moved to France. Either way, she then stopped looking for him, moved somewhere, and found him. So then she had contacted the person, said, I found him. I finally found him. But it just reminded me of that, wondering if you had ever met Derek or anyone else.
I'm certain they're out there to be found. And I presume they remember like I remember. I don't know. But it's, I haven't met any of them since then.
Yeah. And then, so you were being trained. You had to hold their hand or you'd hold it out. You couldn't do it with humans, but with these, they opened a channel for you.
Yeah. A couple of interesting points is that the blonde-haired woman and the dark-haired woman telepathically communicates in a way that we couldn't hear, only with each other. And she, I would also mention as well, looked completely different to a blonde woman. The blonde woman looked human passing, pretty much. She was essentially human. She could talk using her voice. And when she did, she had a very, very soft accent. It's very hard to place. But a very soft, very kindly, very fair accent. Very gentle. But she wanted to talk using her mind. She wanted to get to a point where that was all she was going to do with us. Like a teacher. It was like, okay, I've done this for you now, but now this is what we're going on to. The darker haired woman I should make mention was clearly not human. She had eyes. The closest I can compare it to is a barn owl, and I adore owls. I really do. Like the owls. That's a whole thing in itself. They just followed me my whole life. She had eyes that were like a barn owl. There's like tiny little black eyes. She had a face that was almost more grey shaped in the way that it was angled. She had the same sort of grey like mouth. She had a more human sort of nose, a very, very large forehead. Her hair went down to about here, and it was very kind of like slick, almost plasticky black. Not a wig, but like a very kind of slickness to it. And her skin color was almost like if you've ever seen like a dead jellyfish wash up on a beach. It was the same sort of color, like that sort of gooey transparentness. So
you could almost see through her skin in a sense.
You would have been able to, I mean, it's the kind of skin where you'd think you'd be able to do that, but you couldn't see her insides.
Okay.
So her and the blonde woman were talking to each other in a way that we couldn't hear. But when she was talking to us, the interesting difference between her and me was that she instantaneously had in her mind exactly what she wants to say. And she could say it and think it at exactly the same time simultaneously. We humans don't do that. There's an ever so slight difference in time between what we're thinking and when we say it. And when we're thinking stuff in our heads, I noticed even as a little boy when I was doing this with her, my head would go through multiple different sentences. Like it would try and grammatically arrange itself before it would say something so it would be coherent. And sometimes I would try to mask when she was asking me how I was feeling or what I was thinking. I would try to mask it because, you know, that's what you do with humans generally. You don't, you know, it's just a survival thing. But she knew exactly when we were not telling her 100% honesty as to how we were feeling. She already knew. She was asking us as an honesty test, and she would sternly correct us if we didn't, if we weren't honest. And I think at first she thought it was kind of cute the way that my brain worked. She thought it was quite humorous, but after a while she became not unkindly but less tolerant of it. It was like, you can move beyond this now. And the last that I can remember of kind of like the training that we had together was when she finally sat down with me and had a proper conversation. And I wish I could remember what she said. But she finally sat down, but she had this huge long conversation, like I just wanted for ages. And that was instead of me seeing the stuff on the screen that day. I got to be taken to the side, just her and me, and have a conversation. And then after that, the abduction stopped. And I was never taken by them again. Never saw it again.
At the I think at the end of your report, you do talk about your ideas of regression, and you said sometimes I feel like I don't want to know what happened, and then other times I'd be interested just to see what would happen for the sake of knowing and everyone else learning something. I believe you said something to that effect. But when it comes to that conversation, boy, that would be one heck of a conversation to remember, I would think, because that was.
I would like to remember it if possible. Yeah.
Yeah.
Was there? You think there? Well, you said you don't really remember. Do you think it was? You said it was detailed in nature. Was it long, short, medium, or
have any perception? A long conversation.
Wow.
Way longer than this.
Wow.
We just had like a proper talk together. Yeah.
Wow. Have you now? I've said this before. I said this to Lori and Adam said they probably shouldn't do that. But have you ever tried to meditate on it?
No.
And do you want to, or are you afraid to, or you just don't feel it's a?
No, there's no fear in that particular thing. I don't know why I haven't done it. There's almost a sacredness to it. Is the closest thing I could say. I would like to remember naturally, or when they give me the memory. But I think to artificially do that, I think the thing is as well, I'd need to have certainty that I had remembered it accurately. It had been the talk, and if I was just going to meditate on it, I mean, yeah, it's just I don't know. There's almost like this. Yeah, I don't know. It's almost like a sacredness barrier, like that I just don't feel like I want to cross in that respect.
It may be seated in time. Yeah. It may be seated in time. Some of the answers, or especially from just my own experiences, sometimes the memories come out right when they're supposed to in terms of time.
Yeah, I was going to say one thing that I do remember her saying, which was interesting, and I was weirdly enough never any follow up on this in my life, was that I remember that she said to me that she had a daughter, and I would meet her one day. She would love for me to meet her. She was just a little bit younger than me. But the weird thing was is that the way she talked about her, she was talking us in, I have a daughter on Earth. I have a daughter, like from part of your world, like where you come from. Yeah. It's a quite little moment. It was really interesting. And she was like, I wanted to meet her. You'll meet her one day, but I never met her.
You feel you haven't met her? You feel you haven't met her yet?
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't think I've met her yet. No, I don't feel
that may be where the answers are when you meet her.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Well, what would be interesting is if maybe she doesn't even know where she's from, or
Yeah.
I mean, but you'll know. Apparently, it's in due time, at the right time.
Yeah. The time is I believe time is a very big part of the phenomena for sure. More so than what we understand in physics when it comes to time. And the recent understanding of the time crystals, I think, is a step in the right direction. How it's a lot more complex than objects moving through trajectories, is what they kind of think time is, but I don't think that way.
Thank you so much.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you, Catherine. This is awesome.
Yeah, hopefully it's been a bit therapeutic for you too. And
it actually is. But whenever I get to tell it, it is cathartic. Is the word I would use.
That's what Lori said too. Lori said this is very cathartic for me.
Yeah.
I will interview with you guys as many times as you want. I was like, thank you so much. So we're happy to help and be open ears.